This is the price of a lie. This is the cold, brutal cost of delusion. And when you look at the £50 billion payment the UK is now confirmed to be handing over to the European Union, you're not looking at a mere financial transaction. You're looking at the bill for a historic, unforgivable mistake. And this colossal sum, which has ballooned for past all initial estimates, is not a slap in the face to taxpayers due to poor negotiation, as some critics claim. It's a direct, unavoidable consequence of the Brexiteers' decision to leave the EU. And let's be crystal clear. The responsibility for this monumental financial burden rests entirely with those who promised a prosperous, cost-free separation. They are the ones who said the money would be saved and redirected to the NHS, who sold a fantasy of a Brexit dividend. You know, also the £350 million a week. Yeah. That's even a different context here. And the owner's data release shows the stark reality. Since the UK left in 2020, around £44 billion has already gone to Brussels. And when you factor in the additional £6 to £8 billion or so committed under the exit deal, the total cost now surges past £50 billion. And this figure is more than an embarrassment. It's the physical manifestation of the disastrous political gamble that was taken. And it's the ultimate proof that the original promises were nothing but smoke and mirrors designed to win a vote at any cost. And the very existence of this bill, a massive financial transfer to the bloc they supposedly escaped, demolishes the core tenet of the Leave campaign. They promised control and they delivered a massive financial liability. They promised a saving, they delivered an unprecedented escalating debt, and they promised freedom. They delivered a divorce settlement that will haunt the Treasury for decades. And the initial estimates of the financial settlement were in the region of £35 to £39 billion. And even that figure was shocking at the time, but to see it now exceed £50 billion is the clearest indication that the original estimates and the assurances that followed were completely flawed or deliberately misleading. The European Commission, far from being the defeated party here, is laughing all the way to the bank, at least as Frank Furedi of the MCC Brussels think tank observed. And why wouldn't they be? They successfully negotiated a settlement that secures their financial stability and forces a departing member to fully honor commitments made while it was part of the club. The negotiators on the UK side, those appointed by the champions of Brexit, were clearly either out of their depth, unwilling to fight for the financial interests of their taxpayers, or simply so desperate to secure any deal to ratify their political project that they waved through whatever was demanded. And the payments are not discretionary. They are the legal obligation the UK signed up to that under the withdrawal agreement. But let's trace that legal obligation back to its source. It exists only because the political decision to leave was made in the first place. And every single pound of this money could have stayed in the UK had the country remained a member, with its contribution simply being its normal cost of membership. Instead, they are paying a massive exit fee and simultaneously throwing away the economic benefits of single market membership. It's the double punishment of a bad decision. And don't get started here with the EU is punishing the UK. No, the UK is punishing the UK. They are literally paying for the privilege of a worse trading relationship, which the government's own Office for Budget Responsibility estimates will shrink the UK economy by 4% in the long run, compared if they stayed in the EU. And this is the core tragedy. The massive financial outflow is paired with a guaranteed long-term decline in economic prosperity. The money is leaving the country right when the UK economy needs every single penny to mitigate the self-inflicted damage of the decision to exit. Think of the annual payments. £18.1 billion in 2020 alone, followed by billions more every single year since. And for years, the net contribution to the EU as a full member was about £9 billion annually. And they are now paying more to leave than they would have paid to stay. And they are losing all representation and influence in the process. The irony is so thick, it's choking the ability to govern. And former Brexit Minister David Jones, now with Reform UK, might call this a slap in the face to all the hard-working Britons. I call it the Brexiteers I owe you paid for those by the very hard-working Britons here. They were told they would be richer and that their lives would be easier, that the country would be sovereign and powerful. And now they face a cost of living crisis, the constant threat of tax hikes in the budget, and the cold reality that the UK's finances have been set back by decades, all thanks to a populist fantasy. It's no wonder, because they don't even understand how anything worked. They didn't do it in the time of the referendum, and I mean the people voting for that, not the people lying to the people. They probably knew what they were doing, but they're still claiming a lot of nonsense. Just read it in my comments once again. We have not left the EU until we also have left the European Court of Human Rights. The EU is a member of the European Court of Human Rights, but it has nothing to do with EU membership. There are tons of countries in the Charter of Human Rights there. Watch the Patrick Stewart video, please, if you want to understand the whole thing and who started it and how that's working. But that is not part of EU membership. And if you're in there, you are not an inch inside the EU by being a member there. But the comments below the videos always tell me a lot about the knowledge of people claiming that Brexit is great, about how things work. And that was just one more example about that. But also, the Treasury's pathetic response that they are merely committed to honouring legal obligations is a weak deflection from the source of the disaster. Those obligations include the UK's share of outstanding budgetary commitments and liabilities, such as the pensions of EU staff, commitments that were already known, and which should have been honestly accounted for from the very first day of the referendum campaign. And pensions of British EU members of parliament, by the way. Do you remember a name that could come up there in this point? But instead, the true figures were obscured. They were minimized and flat out denied. And the fact that payments for things like the pensions liabilities stretch until at least 2064 means that this bill is not just a present burden. It's a generational tax on future prosperity. And this political decision, driven by a campaign built on slogans and denial and lies, has created a financial anchor for the UK economy that will drag down growth and limit opportunity for young people who had no say in the vote. But let's look precisely at where this £50 billion come from. The payments are not a penalty fee or a fine imposed by the EU. They are the UK's share of financial commitments it legally agreed to while it was a full voting decision-making member. The majority of the money falls into three main buckets, all entirely predictable. Starting with the reste à liquider, and this is the largest component of the settlement and arguably the most egregious example of the cost of leaving. Reste à liquider is the French term for remaining to be paid, and it represents the EU's unpaid bills. When the UK was a member, it, alongside all other member states, voted for the Multi-Annual Financial Framework, the MFF, the EU's 7-year budget plan. Under EU budget rules, a distinction is made between commitment appropriations, that's the total legal promise to fund project over the 7-year period, and payment appropriations, the actual cash paid out in a given year. The EU typically commits to spend money faster than it pays it out, especially for long-term projects like regional aid, infrastructure, or scientific research, which can take years to move from approval to final payment. When the UK officially withdrew, all those projects that the UK had committed its share to, but for which the cash payment hadn't yet been made, became its legal obligation. The UK signed the checks and then tried to leave the table before the dinner was served. And this bill is due because British politicians, as part of the EU, committed to projects across the continent, and the EU rightly insists that its funding stream for hospitals in Poland or research labs in Germany should not collapse simply because the UK decided to walk out. The money is necessary because to refuse would mean breaking international law and destabilizing crucial projects the UK itself helped approve. And the second long-term component is the UK's share of long-term liabilities, primarily the named pensions of EU staff. When the UK was a member, it contributed to the EU budget with funds which funds the pensions of its administrators, its translators and officials. And these are people who spent their careers serving an institution of which the UK was a part. The EU runs an unfunded defined benefit scheme, meaning the pensions are paid directly out of the current budget, and the UK, as a departing member, is required to pay its proportionate share of the capitalized value of those future pensions and the pension rights earned up until the end of 2020. And these payments, stretching out to 2064, are not a penalty, but the cost of the UK's liability for staff who dedicated their working lives to the EU. And finally, there was the financial contribution for the transition period itself in 2020. During this time, the UK effectively remained in the single market and the customs union to allow for negotiations, but it lost all its representation and voting rights. And for this privilege of having its trade continue as normal while it negotiated a worse deal, it was required to pay into the budget as if it were a member state, minus the cost of participation in some specific institutions. And this amounted to a full year of contribution in exchange for zero political power. The necessity of these payments under the withdrawal agreement stems entirely from the fact that no country can simply walk away from a club, wipe its hands and ignore years of outstanding joint financial obligations. The principles the EU insisted upon were simple. No EU member state should pay more or receive less because of the UK's withdrawal, and the UK must pay its share of the commitments taken during its membership. Afterwards, of course, Germany paid more, but not for the time of the UK membership. And these were commitments made by successive British governments and signed off by the UK's representation in Brussels. And the lie of the Brexiteers was the suggestion that they could simply refuse to pay or that the EU would fold and waive the bill. By signing the withdrawal agreement, a Tory government ratified this massive payment, making it a legal reality. And this entire situation is not a temporary blip. It's an enduring, expensive monument to the biggest political misjudgment of a generation. The £50 billion bill is not just money paid, it's money wasted on an unnecessary, economically detrimental and poorly executed withdrawal from a critically important political and economic union. It is the price of sovereignty as defined by those who never counted the cost to the people they claim to represent. And every time a new figure is released, every time the total creeps higher, it serves as a devastating indictment of the entire project. This is what taking back control truly looks like. A massive bill, a smaller economy, and a political class trying to deflect blame for an inevitable catastrophe. And the only way to honestly address this situation is to acknowledge that the fault is not with the paperwork or the European Commission or the legal process, but with the fundamental decision to leave the EU in the first place. The Brexiteers are the ones who chose the path that led directly to this £50 billion. And it is a price no responsible government should have ever agreed to pay by not walking that way. So, if you want to put this bill of £50 billion somewhere, put it on the doorsteps of the people named Farage, Johnson, etc. And if you want to see another video right now, the next one is right here in the end screen. I'll see you there. I'll be back.